I think one of my subscribers sent me this. I'm not sure which one it was that actually told me about this and which I'm talking to you about. But this is going to be about the mass graves that they have just recently found in Tulsa, Oklahoma, following the terrorist attack. Let's just call it what it is. That's exactly what it was, instead of what they've been calling it for so long to try to water down what actually happened. Now, if any of you watch that show Watchmen that comes on HBO, which is a very good show, they talked about the Black Wall Street bombings and murders and terrorism that happened in the very first episode of that show, and how ironic this article that I'm going to read from and this story pops up a couple days after the season finale of the show. So what you're seeing here is a picture of the aftermath of what happened. As you can see, it's still smoke there from burnings. They pretty much decimated that entire time. They leveled it flat. Like, that's all that was left of a once thriving, strong, independent black community. I'm going to go ahead and read this article that's coming from NPR. It says, for decades, historians poring over photographs, written records, and oral interviews have suspected where victims may have been buried after the Tulsa race massacre of 1921. And on Monday night, researchers announced there is new evidence that supports those suspicions. After studying 4 identified sites using ground-penetrating radar, scientists led by the State of Oklahoma Archaeological Survey confirmed they discovered anomalies indicating what may be at least 2 mass burials. I'm as confident as I can be in the results. That is a very big candidate for something associated with the massacre, said Scott Hammerstedt, senior researcher at the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey, said at a public forum on Monday. One of the newly discovered pits is in a section of Tulsa's Oak Lawn Cemetery. It measures roughly 30 feet by 25 feet, which researchers said is large enough for up to 100 bodies. The second possible mass grave is in an area called the Canes. It is a small piece of land near the Arkansas River covered in overgrown vegetation. Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum said the second phase of the investigation will continue next year, but next steps need to be approved by the 1921 Mass Graves Investigation Public Oversight Committee. That includes further geophysical surveys and efforts to excavate the sites. It is still unclear how many people were killed in the 1921 race massacre, also known as the 1921 Tulsa race riot. They will never ever call this thing a terrorist attack, even though that's what it was. My own belief is that a reasonable number can go as high as 300, Scott Ellsworth, a University of Michigan historian, said, adding that others believe it could be many, many, many more people that were killed. But to date, the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, made up of descendants of the tragedy as well as historians, have confirmed and identified only 35 African-American individuals who were killed. Ellsworth said that all of the victims whose remains the group have been searching for are homicide victims. He added that all but one of the victims were interred by strangers in burials that were controlled by the white authorities of the time. Nearly all took place during a period of martial law that was declared in Tulsa following the riot that lasted a few days. That means the family members of the deceased were held under armed guard away from their dead mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. They did not know that their loved ones were dead, or they did not know what was happening to them. That's scary right there. It says that they didn't know what was happening to them. So that means there is a possibility that those people who weren't deceased, they most likely were torturing them. There were no goodbyes from family members and no preachers offering prayers and words of comfort. Historian Hannibal Johnson, author of several books about the massacre, told NPR that the furor in Tulsa came after a spat of race riots that swept across the county in 1919. Tulsa was a tinderbox, Johnson explained. There was jealousy of the success of the black community by white residents, Johnson said. Land lust fueled a desire by industrialists and railroad companies to take over the valuable black-owned properties in Greenwood, and the KKK had established a strong foothold in the community. Historic accounts trace the spark of the riot to an incident between a young black man and a white woman in a downtown elevator. Johnson said the man who worked as a shoe shiner and was in the elevator on his way to the restroom was accused of raping the woman who worked as an elevator operator. But really, there must have been a bump or something as the elevator was going up and he grabbed onto her, Johnson said. She apparently let out a scream and he ran out of the elevator when the doors opened. The story was picked up by the Tulsa Tribune, which Johnson said was stoking already tense race relations in the city. In the end, the woman refused to cooperate with prosecutors after charges was filed, saying the accusation was mischaracterized of what happened, but it was too late. Large crowds of white residents gathered at the courthouse demanding that the man be lynched. On May 31st, 1921, on the steps of the courthouse, an altercation broke out between a white man with a gun and a black supporter of the accused man. They struggled over the firearm and the white man was shot, Johnson explained. That set off hours of violence and destruction that decimated the Greenwood district of Tulsa, where black residents lived under Jim Crow segregation. The area was a prosperous black community spanning 35 blocks. It was thriving with black-owned businesses, including theater, dance halls, barbershops, haberdasheries, grocery stores, and doctors' and lawyers' offices. About 10,000 angry and armed white residents stormed into the district. First off, before I go any further, do you see how easy it was for them to get pissed off that fast over a lie? To be quite honest with you, all they needed was just a little bit of an excuse to go and do what they did, because they didn't want to go in there and just torch the place down and didn't have any motive behind it, even if that motive was a lie. That clearly was indeed a lie. Even when it looks like the chick was about to backtrack what she said, like they said it was already too late. That's the same thing that happened in Rosewood. If you saw the movie, that chick said she got raped by a black man, although she was being beaten by her husband. But to be on code and protect her husband from what he was doing, she blamed it on an innocent black person that they never even found, but they destroyed the entire town and many black people were killed. She deserved that ass whooping at the end of the movie. Let's see. White mobs prevented firefighters from stopping fires, and some witnesses say planes dropped bombs and strafed the community with gunfire. One local paper printed the following story a day after the decimation began. With the coming of dawn this morning, following a night of race rioting and death, hundreds of armed white men in motor cars formed a circle of steel about Little Africa, and a continuous raffle of rifle and revolver fire could be heard. So they basically trapped those people inside, and they could not get out. That's basically what they did. Johnson said conservative estimates of the damage were between 1.5 million and 2 million at the time, which would be well over $25 million in today's dollars. The incident and many of its horrors were recreated in the debut episode of HBO's Watchmen in October, like I said at the beginning of the video. Johnson called the depiction well done and provocative. He's glad that the massacre is getting more attention. Johnson said there's a conspiracy of silence around the horrific events. I would definitely agree, and it's not so much a conspiracy, it's intentional. Phoebe Stubblefield, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Florida who sits on the committee, noted the panel does not want any exhumed bodies to remain unburied for years. We want them to be reinterred respectfully and not in a museum somewhere on a shelf. That's a very... Whenever I have to talk about this, which seemingly has to be almost every year, it sends chills each and every time as if I just heard the story for the first time. And it's crazy because many of us don't hear about stuff like this particular story here until we're grown, because it's not talked or taught in schools. Hell, some colleges don't even touch on it. Unless you go to an HBCU, they may touch on it. But even then, you're already grown. You know, you're 18, 19, whatever. You're already grown at the time. This is a story that should be taught to you when you're a child, very early on. You know what? They don't even talk about MOVE. They didn't even talk about that. And that happened back in 1985. That's way more recent, and they practically did the same thing with that, just on a smaller scale. Because, they were more integrated at the time, so you couldn't go and destroy the entire city of Philly. But, yeah, they said thousands of bodies were buried in mass graves, which means not individual graves where each person has their own slot. They just literally dug a big ass hole and just dumped all those bodies on top of each other and then threw dirt on top of them, where now something has grown over it, or it may have also possibly been something built over it. So imagine if you lived or had a business in that area where those mass graves are, and you found out that wherever you lived or wherever your business is at is sitting over a grave that has thousands of bodies underneath it. That would be like some damn poltergeist shit. That literally sounds like the movie Poltergeist, which basically was they had a bunch of dead bodies under that home, and the spirit came back and haunted the family that lived in that house. That's basically what it is. Except, of course, it wouldn't be as dramatic in real life theatrical rise because that was just a movie. But still, when you think about it, it kind of plays out the same way. But that also shows you the disrespect they had for black deceased bodies back then. They'll just throw them in a mass grave and be like, it is what it is. And this is the type of stuff they don't want us to learn. Like I said, they don't want this to be taught to us. That's why you have to dig for something like this. We live in an establishment where those McGraw-Hill books wanted to rearrange what slavery was, what chattel slavery was, and try to call it, what was it? Volunteer work or something. Like, it was something stupid. It made no sense. I don't know many people that would volunteer to want to go through chattel slavery. I'll put it this way. If it's something that Palm Color wouldn't have done to themselves back in the day, I highly doubt anyone else would want to go through it. And you know what's so crazy? I'll flip it on us. Whatever we don't want to go through, they are going through right now. Like that opioid plague, them low birth rates, and whatever else that they got going on. But this is a very interesting article right here. I'm glad that I was able to find it. I don't know if one of my subscribers sent it to me or not, but I may have forgot if they did. But something just said, let me go ahead and look this up so I can read it to y'all, and you can get more additional information, which I'm sure there's a whole bunch out there. And it's crazy. It's almost 100 years. It'll be 99 years next May. Well, this upcoming May in June. And then it'll be 100 years the following year. That's crazy. They should have some kind of recognition for the 100-year anniversary. That would be the perfect time for, no time like the present, but the 100-year anniversary. That would be the perfect time for them to actually really put out a big notice about what happened on those 2 days back in 1921. So that should be something that should happen May 31st to June 1st, 2021, the 100-year anniversary. It should definitely be like wall-to-wall events happening, especially there, so people can know what happened that day or get more information about what happened that day. Just imagine if you found out you was a descendant of somebody that was there. Just imagine that. I'll talk to you all in the next one.